Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for us to look back to the past, 10 years ago, in fact, because it's been, yes, a whole decade since the release of the Drake album, Views, which, if you haven't noticed, has kind of held up as one of his biggest, most streamed, and most celebrated albums ever. A record that personally I wasn't really crazy about when it first came out, but still went on to define so many classic sounds and writing styles for Drake's entire catalog, and also brought a number of formatting ideas and writing tropes that he has continued to repeat on album after album after album since. So I figured, what more reason to revisit this record and have an in-depth conversation about it with two of the biggest Drake fans that I know, Ant and Lou over at the NFR Podcast. So here comes that conversation right now. All right, like I said, here we have on the horn with us NFR Podcast. We have each respectively decided, and Luca's here too. Give us a shot of Luca. We've decided to lay down our swords and put aside our mutual hatred for each other to talk about this album that is turning 10 this year. Views, while it is a record that obviously I didn't give it the most positive review when it first came out, it is an album that has, in the eyes of many Drake fans, kind of like withstood the test of time, has maybe not kind of garnered the sort of long-term praise that Nothing Was the Same has, but a lot of Drake fans still view the record as super positive, think the album still holds a lot of water and weight, and the record still continues to stream really well. It is perceived as like, one of the higher points in his discography. So I figure, what more reason do we need to kind of like go back after all of this time and reassess the record, see if anything is kind of like moved in terms of our feelings on the album. But before we get into any sort of like opinions or preferences or highlights or lowlights, I want to ask you guys first, as two guys who have like covered Drake super close for years and years and years and
Sure.
really kind of like love this record. How do you feel like it's aged in his discography? How do you feel like the past 10 years have been to this album?
Yeah, so Lou and I have done extensive coverage over the years, especially on Views, right? And I feel like when we first started podcasting, Views was only out for maybe like 3-4 years at that point. People still had time to live with it, but I think it's one of the albums in Drake's catalog that's probably getting more and more praise over time. That's something that I've seen within the catalog where people are starting to realize, like, okay, this might be a Drake album that has the most diversity when it comes to sound, like song palettes and the different types of sounds that you're going to get out of it, whether it's like dancehall, whether it's conscious rap, like anything that you want from Drake, I think you could find within this track list. And I think there's timeless records on here as well. So I think it stands out in that way. And I also think it's a transition record for Drake in the sense that before you got, if you're reading this is too late, it was a lot more rap centric. You got a lot more bar work. With this and Views, you see like, he's trying out different things that then lay the foundation work for different albums like A More Life or a Scorpion, or even some of the sort of sounds that you hear on a CLB. So I think that it's a transition point within his career. I think that, especially for Drake fans and even general rap fans that we see in our own community, people are starting to appreciate more and more over time. And you have some of the most memorable records in his entire catalog on that track.
Yeah, and I think that like this also came at a pivotal point in Drake's career where like he was fresh off the heels of the Meek Mill beef. He had taken 3 years since his last solo album, which was Nothing Was the Same. And he really wanted to make that leap of like, okay, I'm already established as one of the biggest rappers in the game. Now I'm going to take this leap to become one of the biggest artists in the game. And I feel like Views not only defined that summer and that year, this was the mark where it's like, okay, this is my global takeover. And he obviously did that by like tapping into his, West Indian and West African influences, making songs like One Dance, like Controlla. And it's an album that's close to our hearts, Anthony, just because we were 16 when this album came out. We fucking downloaded the album on iTunes. We were going to a bunch of Sweet 16 parties at the time.
Damn, this album was an iTunes download.
It was an iTunes download. This was like before, streaming was still
streaming was there, but
it was there, but it's like, yeah, there was still some heavy iTunes purchases going down. And I just feel like this album definitely defined a certain time. And for Drake, it was a big step forward, I feel like, in his artistry. So I want to ask you that, bro. Like, how did you feel about him kind of venturing off into the dance hall sound. Like, you feel like he pulled it off listening back to it now. Like,
but you see, like, to that point though, especially if you follow the narrative of Views and if you pay attention to the production, like the progression of the seasons, let's say, was like a huge at least like talking point for Drake fans when following the album, right? Like going through all 4 seasons, starting off in the winter and then after that ending off in fall. And I think that, yes, while there was like a bit more of a push for commercial appeal streams, record sales, and obviously having those types of pop records on the album, I do think that there's a certain cohesiveness to the record as a whole, right? And like it's sort of like it's sort of like his love letter to Toronto in a sense, with records like Western Road Flows or even a 9, where, you know, he really wanted to make this album for the city. And I think cohesively throughout it, like there was also sounds like dancehall, for example, that we were just talking about, that were bubbling up in the Toronto scene and that he wanted to bring to the forefront for, like, let's say his general users to at least like engage with. So
I'm happy you bring that up, because I feel like this is the only like 20 plus Drake album, 20 plus song Drake album where it's actually cohesive and there's actually some world building going on. Like, right from the first track, Anthony, Keep the Family Close, like you're getting the wind kind of blowing and those sound effects. You're getting a girl speaking in some Toronto slang on the intro, saying it's getting chilly outside. Like, I do admire that about the album, is that there is this moody atmosphere set up by Drake, and especially 40 on the production side.
That's also a track that like was striking me a little bit just because of the tone of the writing. And like we have heard with Drake for years and years and years in his bars, you know, we have these elements of like bitterness and betrayal and untrustworthiness, like, you know, of those around you, and sort of like, you know, him taking issue with people switching sides, not being consistent, not riding for him in the way that he feels like they personally should be. But I feel like this was kind of like an era, a time period in which, when he wrote like that, he still felt like maybe he needed to be a little guarded about it. And as a result, I feel like the descriptions that he uses to sort of like talk about these people are more general, or sort of like vague enough to where you don't really know fully who he's talking about. And there wasn't quite as much sort of like, you know, sleuthing around the internet at the time of like, who's this person? Who's this person? Who's this person? And now these days, like, he's making it so painfully clear who he's referring to, and also like naming names on random tracks as well. And it sort of becomes like this, it's become this like ritual with every new Drake album cycle. We see all the headlines of like, here's all the people Drake names on his new album. And, you know, I personally, I find it a little bit more, I guess, I don't know. I find it a little easier to kind of like buy into the mystique of a lot of what he's saying when I don't know everybody who he's referring to, because sometimes when I look at what he's saying and I'm like, why are you mad at Esperanza Spalding? It's Esperanza Spalding. You know what I mean? It's like, how is Esperanza Spalding your op, you know? But like, you know, when you're kind of just like, when it kind of stays personal and sort of, you know, and you sort of simultaneously keep it personal, I sort of felt like a lot of these jabs and subs that he tends to throw at people were a little bit easier to take. And I'm like, okay, I can see what he's saying. You know, he's mad at this person for, you know, not acting toward him or treating him in the way that he feels like he should. And maybe that, and it sort of made it easier to kind of relate to all of it, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And that's another kind of theme within the album, is just sort of his afterthoughts after the Meek Mill feud, which I thought was interesting too. I think a lot of the lyrics kind of aged well on the album, in the sense of like what he's rapping about in reference to the beef, and just this idea of people like trying to write his ending, right? Like lyrics like, my enemies want to be friends with my other enemies, I don't let it get to me. We saw that come into fucking full fruition in 2024 with all of the enemies linking up. Also, a lyric like, they still out to get me because they never got me, they still out to get me, I don't get it, I cannot be God, that's a given. I think there is truth to that, in the sense of like, as much as gets revealed about Drake's personality or the way he maybe moves in the industry, he is such a dominant force in music that it's almost impossible for his ending to ever be written by anyone but himself. And I feel like he started kind of, you know, rapping about that kind of shit on Views.
And you saw that also, and if you're reading this too late, like songs like No Tellin', for example, where he directly, like, obviously talks about going hunting on the second part of the song. And that's kind of been prominent within his entire catalog. But you also saw with songs that came out before Views, like a Summer 16, for example, like what type of timing that he was on. So I think that regardless of all that and all the subliminals that you might get or the aggressive tone of the record on certain songs, you do see like a good balancing act of also like deep writing cuts, like a Western Road Flows, for example, where not every single track like has that sort of sub or that type of tonality. And that's something that I appreciate is also the balance of the track list, right? Because one thing that Lou and I have a conversation about, especially with Scorpion, is like by the way, I found that was a great album, and I think there's a lot of writing cuts that I do enjoy off of it. It was really dipped and coded within like that Pusha T beef, and there was so many subliminals and so many like probably direct shots at that point.
He changed the whole album after that happened.
The whole album, you know. But with the Meek Mill beef, I think that there was a nice influence of that, right, and like that sort of aggression and anger, but also, you know, more stuff that you come to love from Drake, and that's something that I kind of want to see maybe with his next album, Iceman, is like I want to see that balance again where, yes, obviously, like the sublims are fire and you want to see him be competitive. You want to see him talk his shit. But there's other sides to Drake's writing that I want to see on this album where it's like, get deep and personal again. Let us know where you've been at. Like, I want to see those types of writing cuts. So let me ask you this. Do you think that the album aged in a proper way on that stance where it's like a lot of stuff maybe comes from 2016, but a lot of the messages maybe on the album are timeless to us? Do you have that same sentiment, Anthony, with the album?
I think the record was, especially going back and kind of comparing it to If You're Reading This, which obviously I liked much more in retrospect, and I loved upon impact. But you know, going back to this record, even though there was a good deal of it that felt underwhelming to me, and we'll get into that, I still thought a lot of the writing was kind of diaristic and very thoughtful. It was like, in comparison, a much more melancholic record. And I think there's aspects of that I'm able to appreciate a little bit more in retrospect. You know, I sort of felt like, or hoped, kind of coming off of If You're Reading This, that we would sort of like maintain that momentum in some sort of way. And this record like really kind of like toned things down. So I was able to kind of like go back and listen to it without that expectation. You know, it's like, okay, this is going to be a moodier listen. This is going to be a more introspective listen. He's going to be in his feels. It's almost like kind of the calm after the storm. I've had this sort of like really aggressive high point in my career. I've come off of this beef that just happened. And, you know, pretty much every moment where he is hyping himself up here, because of how like ubiquitous everybody's feelings were, and, you know, sort of like across the board, everyone's feelings were about how that beef went down and how Drake performed, and, you know, how it sort of like helped shape his career. It was kind of easy to kind of like take all that braggadocio as just kind of like purely truth, and, you know, just it is what it is. It's like he's just kind of speaking facts to the kind of like successful run that he's on right now. But still, you know, with that, there is like a lot of moodiness like kind of permeating the album. And I just want to know for you guys, like, you know, is that a quality that it at all sort of like pulls this album down for you guys like it does for me to a degree, or is that like almost like a selling point for you?
Some of that melancholic writing, I would say, that's kind of bringing it down for you?
I would say like not just that, but the pacing of some of these songs, whether we're talking about like Redemption or With You. I really think there's kind of like a bit of a lull in the middle of the record that, you know, I feel like the tracks like Faithful as well are just like so stripped back. I do think the record bounces back with like, you know, Still Here, you know, and obviously you have Control and One Dance, which, you know, bring a bit more of a party vibe. But I do feel like the record hits a little bit of a lull at that point.
So to speak on that, like I think that especially in the middle portion of the track, you get a 3-track run of something like Redemption, With You, and Faithful, and it kind of takes like maybe a bit of a slower turn, especially after going from something like Western Road Flows, and then you get Still Here, Control of One Dance, like you get more of those picker-uppers on the track list. But I think, especially with me being a fan of an album like Take Care, for example, a slow pace sort of R&B 40 produced track like a Redemption is one of my favorite off of the album.
One of his best R&B tracks.
Yeah, and it's like, bro, the vocals are great. They're smooth, bro. You get like this underwater sort of tone throughout the entire record. Almost feels like you're drowning within it. I will say this though, I do feel as if, and Lou and I have spoken about this on different podcasts, songs like With You and Faithful, they're not the strongest cuts on the album. So you could say like you find some of the weaker tracks in the middle point, but I think those are maybe the only two off of this album where you could say, okay, like I could have gone without this, and these could probably be skips for me when I'm going through this track list again.
I will say this. This is probably going to be a hot take, but I feel like this is close to being a fucking skipless album. If not, is skipless to me in the sense of the two songs you mentioned are the only ones that I feel like I don't always feel like revisiting. Like even looking at a Faithful, I think the highlight off of that was that Division feature where he's hitting these incredible high notes, comes into this falsetto and really just nails it. Whereas the Drake verse is pretty lackluster. But even that song, I feel like has a super catchy hook that's very memorable. So I don't know. I feel like in terms of like the lulls with those records, maybe I can agree with something like With You, but Redemption to me is phenomenal, bro. I feel like I'm locked into all 4 or 5 minutes of that track. Even that fourth verse is amazing, where he starts to kind of, you know, speak about how all of his exes have moved on and how he's kind of experiencing this loneliness. And I think that just the tonality and the cadences that he used for these R&B records, it feels way less cruise control than like some of the performances on some Sexy Songs for You, where it's like you can really hear the pain behind the vocals. Like I think that there's truly like real emotive performances from him on those R&B tracks.
I agree. This does feel a lot less cruise control than like some Sexy Songs, but I feel like this record was also a bit of a first for him in terms of like not super cleanly structuring out his tracks in the way that he used to when he maybe was more concerned with the way that certain songs needed to be shaped for like radio play and traditional commercial formats. You know, You With Me, which is a track that I do like on the record in I don't think it's a track I hated when I first heard it, but I do think it is a standout now. You know, that's a track to me that like the song almost has like no format to it. You know, it's just kind of this linear thing, and he's dropping a few bars, and then all of a sudden he'll just jump into randomly like slide on a late night, you know, and it's like, is that the chorus? Is this next refrain that you drop the chorus? Like, it's almost like a formatless song, which like, I feel like at that point it works, but not every moment that he does on this record where he kind of like tries that or has done that since then, obviously, like you just said, has been quite as good, you know, when he's sort of like, you know, almost, in an unplanned sort of way. I mean, you know, given his writing chops and his collaborations with other artists and how sort of freeform we see some of his songs to be now, who knows how much of it was like pre-planned or sort of like just done improvisationally in the moment. We don't fully know, but still, it does seem like he's like, you know, testing the waters with that a little bit here. Sometimes it's working. Other times I'm not quite as crazy about it. I feel myself, as you know, you guys have just like kind of cited, drawn a lot more to tracks where he feels more locked in and determined, like on Western Road Flows. To me, like that sort of, and that's not even the first time he's done this even, but those kind of tracks where he's sounding really determined, he's on a righteous instrumental, and he's like really kind of going over all the ways in which he's frustrated, burned, you know, feeling himself as well. Like that's just like classic Drake all the way. I would also, you know, going back to You With Me, this track also has a bunch of lyrical highlights too. Going back to bars like "You toying with it like Happy Meal, 3 dots, you thinking of a reaction still." That's maybe one of the most Drake bars of all time. Like that really is one of the most. If you could distill Drake's vibe and writing style, you know, in like maybe 10 bars, like that would have to be one of them. To me.
Or like one of the writing cuts. Like I know you heard that my girl is sponsored by Audemars. That's why she's always correcting me. Like my time is off. Obviously, Audemars being the watch brand. Like there's those types of like, I would say double entendres that are sort of sprinkled out throughout the entire album. But speaking to You With Me, one of the biggest highlights for me was the DMX interpolation, right? So going back, the DMX's 1999 song, What These Bitches Want, I like the interpolation. And I feel like that interpolation also adds somewhat of a structure to the song itself, because you get that chorus that's interpolated by Drake 2 different times, and you kind of get those those 3 verses that are structured throughout the record. So I do think from an experience, like there is sort of like these pockets that he comes in and out of, like the sort of vocal performance he just gave off. That was actually pretty sick. But, you know, like I think that when you go through it, there is a cohesiveness to it, and it plays into also like that sort of like kind of being bitter to a certain extent about a past relationship, but also like this double-edged sword of him wanting to kind of dive back in and kind of being like sort of things feel out of control for him with his relationships, where a lot of shit is out of his hands, and it's due to his lifestyle and the rap career that he's taken on throughout his life that's fucked with these relationships that he has, and him trying to like balance that all out. I think that's also another motive within the album.
Yeah,
you're talking about Feel No Ways, right?
I'm talking about You With Me on this one. Like, for example,
okay.
like
No, the You With Me is the is the DMX track?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I got confused with that intro, but go on.
Yeah, and even it's also cool. He also starts off the song by saying, "On some DMX shit, I group DM all my exes." Like, I love the way that he starts off.
Such another
like in the group chat.
Yeah, he group DMs all my exes,
just saying that they all belong to him.
That their relationship is growing closer as they're no longer together.
It's so wild. But
yeah,
back to you were saying, we're kind of touching on the songwriting. I feel like that was a big narrative when this album did come out, was how cheesy or corny some of the punchlines were on this album. Like, I remember one of them being I get green like Earth Day, for example, or there was even on Pop Style, got so many chains they call me Chaining Tatum. Listen, yeah, definitely fucking super cheesy, but I don't want to say these are like, you can't find the worst bars of his.
It's not like a G-Eazy album.
It's not like, I'm not with the rah-rah, I am a da-da. Like, you're not finding like those types of lines on here, which are some of the worst ever. Girl, you a lesbian, me too. Like, it's not that level,
he definitely had like worse bars after this.
Yeah,
and maybe that's also kind of like painting my perception here. Like, I can't say there were too many bars that, you know, to me, at least in terms of one-liners or him making attempts at like, oh, this is like a quippy, funny kind of thing. You know, for me, what sort of like, I know I didn't like at the time and still hit me as a little weird was kind of the contrast between, and again, I just mentioned it, like a relationship track like Feel No Ways, which to me, in terms of like Drake describing a romantic dynamic, I personally thought was really interesting. Like, you know, him feeling the need at one point in his life to move on from somebody because he felt like his life was stagnant with that person and he wasn't growing with that person, and he really needed to dedicate himself to what he was doing with his music and in hip hop in order to advance and become the person who he wants to be. And just the way he's able to paint that picture so vividly with so few lines and so few words, I think is great. You know, the negative contrast there for me deeper into the album is like Child's Play, where he's like opening up the track with, "Why you gotta fight with me a cheesecake?" And it's like, okay,
and then
it just
feels for families that drive Camrys and go to this.
So fire.
But that's funny as fuck. Like, I want to.
I can't stand that track so much. I can't, because I just feel like I'm. Oh my god! I just feel like I'm listening to one side of like the most toxic couple I know, and I can't stand it. I just don't want to have anything to do with it.
But you see, like,
how is it relatable?
No, but to the certain sense of like, you could actually picture
he's fighting with his girl at cheesecake. That's how it's relatable.
But you could, but like, that's the thing though, is I feel like so many people have an appreciation for that song itself, because you've probably been to a restaurant with your girl, bro, and like you guys plan out a nice date, and then after that, bang, it just breaks out into a fucking fight in the middle of like
I've never fought with any of my girlfriends at a restaurant.
Yeah, no, I just feel like,
get what I'm trying to say though, you know?
It's humorous because it's just so over the top and toxic, like you said, like the whole segment 2 where he's rapping about like hiding his car keys because his girl wants to like take the Bugatti to fucking to the pharmacy to buy some tampons. It's like,
right.
All right, Drake. Like, if this
and sending her back to the hood, he says as well.
Yeah.
But the Metro production on that record is incredible too. I love the 808s on it. I think there's a nice bounce to it, and it's one of the more like playful and fun tracks, at least for me, off of this album.
Yeah, it's playful, and again, like, I just think that that's one of the areas where Drake is underrated as a writer, is just like his ability to be comedic in certain sections. Like, there was even some other bars on the album, like I think it's on 9, where he's like, "MJ in every way, I just don't fade away," which is kind of like a cool double meaning there. Or even like, I'm looking at your first week numbers, like, what are those? Just some cool, clever and humorous bars kind of sprinkled throughout, which I don't think we give enough credit for. That's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, and even like some of the pop cultural references, like, you know, sort of like Marcus Houston that was mentioned on the album, or even like David Beckham, like you get that throughout the writing. So I think Drake's also been very good at that, where it's not like the game, you know, fucking name dropping Dr. Dre and Eminem on every single track, but those sort of things where like, you know, you have appreciation for it and you like going through. But I think a song that's super underrated on this album that Lou and I always speak about is the self-titled track Views. That is a song where it's like, oh my goodness, bro, like that could have been a timestamp if you formatted it differently. So how do you appreciate that? Do you think it's underrated? Like, do you go back to it whatsoever? How do you feel about it?
I think that track, again, I think Drake has for a while, and this album just kind of like further solidifies it. I think he has a tendency, and Views, the title track, really is a highlight. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's pretty much spiritually the closer of the album, because after that, obviously, you have Hotline Bling, which, I mean, was a single for well over a year behind the record. And he obviously slapped onto the album for the numbers that it was doing prior to the release of the album, which is, you know, now sort of like a super established like industry thing at this point. You know, like Cardi B putting WAP on her new record, even though like it was a single from years ago. But, you know, Drake for a long time now has had this tendency to either finish his record off or come close to finishing his records off with these absolute bar fests where he just kind of like, you know, tries to tie everything up in terms of like where his head is at, and kind of like leave fans off on a note where things feel like, you know, really strong and determined. And it's like, I'm still hungry. I'm still here. I'm still, you know, the rapper that you've always known and loved and appreciated. Like it is a strong ending to the record for sure.
Yeah, and especially the production on that. Like that was produced by Manish 40 and Boy Wonder.
That gospel sample from the Winans was fucking
incredible. Yeah, the drums.
Another highlight off of the album as a whole, I think, is just the production, obviously, generally speaking, but also the sample selection, I think, was brilliant. Even looking at the Mary J. Blige vocal sample off of Western Road Flow is just so dreamy, so hypnotic. And I thought that was just one of the aspects of the album that keeps you engaged all throughout. And I wanted to ask you that, Anthony, like, how do you feel about the production, generally speaking? Because not that it's one note, but I feel like you are getting mostly like mid-tempo beats, kind of very, you know, very one direction wise, in the sense of like, there's a lot of 90s R&B vintage samples and chops. But with also the blend of like your harder hitting trap leaning beats like a Grammys or even a Still Here, let's say.
No, I actually think the production is pretty versatile on this record while simultaneously maintaining a pretty consistent mood. You know, I think Drake is pretty careful not to do anything that's like too hype or too explosive that's going to break you out of that very kind of like introspective, I would say almost like cerebral energy that most of the album is bringing. Even the big singles that we were talking about earlier that had like, you know, that brought a little dance hall vibes to the table and so on and so forth. Even those feel like a little chilled out and muted, you know, compared to the traditional forms that those styles would typically take. And I can appreciate it in that sense, the consistency sense. I mean, I think if there's anything that I have issue with, like production wise, is that I wish some of these beats, and this is really maybe more of a formatting issue. I wish some of these beats or some of the progressions of these tracks like varied up a little bit more, like along with Drake, or sort of like built to a higher peak. And again, really that's like kind of like a structure thing, like Pop Style, and many other tracks I could probably name, Pop Style, Grammys with Future, Hype as well, which to me in a lot of ways feels almost like a track that could have been on If You're Reading This. You know, those tracks I feel like don't really vary that much instrumentally from start to finish. It's like they have a very strong tone and a very strong vibe that makes them distinct from everything else there, but they don't evolve that much over the course of their runtime. And, you know, that to me is kind of like a bit of a turnoff. Now, maybe Drake's intention is like the repetitiveness of the progressions of some of these tracks, like kind of keeps you locked into that cerebral kind of like toned down approach that a lot of the songs are going for. But it does kind of like make things feel a little less exciting for me than some of his previous records that were maybe structured a bit more sharply.
Okay.
But even I believe it was on You With Me. Like that was one production where I felt like you kind of got like a bit more of like an evolution and a build up, especially when he starts extending his vocals up a bit more and you start to see the production take a turn. It feels a lot more grandiose and you could hear like all of the instrumentation kind of take like sort of like a big high note. And it
Well,
feels
yeah, and
very
especially
grandiose
the
when he-
intro where you're getting the strings and the huge drums, and it's feeling super dramatic there too.
That's it.
It's not like the album's completely devoid of those moments, but I mean, we are talking about a
For
record
sure.
that's like almost 90 minutes long. You
For
know,
sure, absolutely.
And
Like I do agree. Like something like a pop style, for example, does stay one note production wise, and maybe there could have been something in there, whether it's like a beat switch, for example, that you started to see him really experiment with more and more and more on albums that came out after this. Actually,
Right.
all jokes aside, but even like some of the beat transitions on this album were really sick. Like for example, going on to track 5, which is Hype, you get like the spray can sort of shaking and then it goes into Western Road Flows. And now you're starting to see like a bit of like a change of the season. So I think like sonically there were cues that let you know like where you're at in the album. So I think like, yes, while there were certain spots on the track list that could have been a bit more diverse in the way that they progressed, like I think it was just enough to be able to like kind of get you through the album.
Yeah, and I feel like those tracks are obviously still enjoyable just because Drake is really projecting his vocals on those tracks. Like looking at a song like Hype, for example, he's rapping like he has the confidence to be the best rapper alive. Like you can obviously disagree with that, and I'm not saying that I felt that way listening to it, but like there's a level of conviction just based in his tone and just how fiery his delivery is that I feel like has become kind of absent as of late, and that's probably a stylistic choice, right? Like him rapping on these more dustier, vintage, low-key sounding conductor beats on like Scary Hours 3. But I feel like this style of rapping, which is reminiscent of the If You're Reading This Is Too Late style, this is Drake at his best. Like he doesn't need to like lyrical miracle it out. Like as long as he can come in and be dialed in and find the right pockets and have just this ferocity vocally.
Yeah, and you saw that before
makes a
the
huge
album, going
difference.
back to something like Summer 16, right? Like that aggressive nature, or even something like a Trophies where, he's doing a victory lap around you for all the things that he accomplished. I think going back to that point, that's something that I want to see out of like these future Drake albums, and especially now for Iceman. It's like, let's get back to that shit because, like Lou said, that's where you find him at his best on his headline shit, like being able to really feel like he's taking over a record. Another underrated part of the album that I feel as if is also a song, for example, like Summer's Over Interlude and the introduction of like some OVO artists, right? Like that Majid Jordan performance to me was stellar. I love the production on it. I love the vocals on it, and the songwriting is kind of minimal in the sense where you only have a quick like 5-line verse and then after that it goes into the outro. But it was cool to see him kind of bring that format in now where, okay, you got your own track on my album, here's an artist that I want to put on, and it was one of the first for its time. So I think I think looking at this track list, there's so many underrated components, and it's one of those Drake albums where you kind of feel like, okay, there's a lot of attention and detail that went into this and there was a mission that was accomplished. You could have certain gripes about the album, but this did put him into a different stratosphere when it came to his artistry. This allowed him to experiment with different sounds on new albums that now his audience was used to and they kind of trusted him to attack. And I think that even the vocals on this record are some of the best, let's say, that you got on any other Drake album. Like that's something else I want to see, let's say, with future Drake albums is get 40 back in for the vocal mixing. Like a lot of the stuff on Some Sexy Songs for You, Anthony, that we were actually speaking about together when we were doing our shoot back in 2025 is a lot of these vocals just sound super drowned out. They sound a bit uninspired. They don't sound too bright. The use of auto-tune wasn't up to par with his other records. But with this, it's like, dude, the vocals are polished. They sound cohesive. And it didn't sound like, okay, I recorded this in Houston. This was the New York sessions. This was Miami. Like you feel like everything was kind of made together as one experience vocally. And that's something else that I want to see, let's say, from a future Drake album.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And also to sort of like touch down on the production one more time, like, I think this album really, like you guys were kind of saying with the Mary J. Blige sample, that classic formula at this point where you've got that very simple mid-tempo beat, the 90s R&B sample with the highs like really dialed down, sort of like, put through like a low pass filter, and Drake just like, really rapping straightforwardly with a lot of space around his voice. Like that's just become such a classic formula for him at this point, like a sound and a style that he and he alone is like pretty much defined, or sort of has become like the most dominant in. And, routinely those types of tracks that have taken on those formats, that format on every album since has been like always a highlight. It's like fans and, even me have continued to look forward to when those types of moments turn up on a track list for Drake. But to move on, and Ant was trying to sort of like initiate this conversation earlier, I think, let's talk about like Control a little bit, as well as, One Dance, because, these tracks for me, I remember at the time, I was not crazy about these moments, at least in part because I just thought like, his approach to stuff like dancehall on these songs just felt like much blander than dancehall typically I would enjoy or have heard in the past. And on top of it, in addition to that, like I just thought the accent stuff was really silly. And, I know at the time a lot of people made, sort of like these arguments in favor of these tracks saying like, well, he's like, trying to like tribute this burgeoning music style that's like doing really well right now. And, there's all of these like pockets of, influence coming from Jamaican culture in Canada and so on and so forth. And while I do think there is like validity to those claims, for me, it always felt like, musically speaking, a little touristy. And I didn't really see it quite as much as a tribute, as much as like, this is an opportunity for me to hop on something and define another thing for myself, commercially speaking. And I think that's why things have like now evolved to a point where you hear Drake rapping in a bad Spanish accent now, like on a new record, like I think that there was maybe more of an argument for the case of what he's trying to do here. But I think like, the fact that it wasn't entirely based in that is proven in the fact that we now have these tracks that, you guys are like busting your asses laughing at on stream because he just legitimately sounds that fucking goofy talking about himself being poppy and da-da-da-da-da on a track 100%. Because I think he's just kind of seeing these different genres not as like, oh, this is the thing I'm tied to, this is the thing I'm passionate about, maybe more of a thing I can try this in order to sort of give myself more crossover appeal with other audiences.
Yeah, I think that definitely came through on a song like Meet Your Padre, where it almost sounded like parody, to be honest with you, right? Where the accent is absolutely ridiculous. There's not even really an effort to try to, sing carefully or to maybe just stay away from it at all. The thing I will say, though, about like his exploration into the dancehall sound, as time has gone on, it has not felt exploitative to me because it's kind of become a part of his artistic identity, right? Even if you go a year later into More Life, you're finding songs like Madiba Rhythm, you're finding songs like Blem, where he's kind of finding his footing a little bit more. And even though like the performances aren't as extravagant or don't feel as authentic as some of like the dancehall artists from Jamaica, let's say, it does feel like he's kind of adding his own twist and he's making these records catchy enough for us to enjoy them. And I feel like, again, going back to why I feel like it's not too exploitative, it has become part of his artistic identity. Even looking like last year, he put out Which One? Even looking at Blue, Green, Red from 2024, like this has been a sound that he's kind of continued with as the years have gone on. Like, it's not like he's just picked it up when it's hot and then dropped it and never returned to it ever again. So that's kind of my take with it in terms of like, is it exploitative or not? But how do you feel about that?
Well, even going on to some like legendary dancehall artists, for example, like a Vibes Cartel, like I feel like the song is obviously not as like bombastic or like as I would say, authentic to, let's say, the certain records that those types of like legendary artists were making. But I do feel like, especially in hip hop, there is room, let's say, for interpolation, and there is room to borrow from sounds, borrow from lyrics, borrow from like certain cadences. And to me, like the records came out super enjoyable. And you also saw it on More Life, like how he kind of like not exploited it, but he went into those territories a bit deeper, right? With certain records that you just mentioned as well. So I think it depends, like also how you're kind of like looking at the records itself. Like as someone that like has gone through Drake albums, I've reviewed them, I've done like my analyzation work on it. Those are certain songs where I think like, man, I kind of wish like I didn't have to review them. I could just enjoy them while I'm having like, rum and coke on the beach, and like just kind of get it down in that context. So I think it just depends, like, do you appreciate it or not? Like he did it well. I mean, his fan base enjoys it. And, it's also cool because a lot of those sounds that he's borrowing from, he has brought those artists into his own ecosystem and he's shining the light on it.
Yeah, like he had literally signed
Yeah.
Popcan in 2016 around the time of this album.
Well, not only that, but like even like the affiliation with Vibes Cartel, for example. That's someone that has spoken publicly about how like Drake has taken dancehall and like that whole Jamaican sound to a completely different level, and how he feels like he did it in the right way. Like, I don't know if that's just PR, like him just saying it to say it.
Yeah, because at the same time, you had Sean Paul coming out around like 2016, 2017, saying the opposite, where it's like, yo, like Drake is not crediting enough of the dancehall scene. He's not really properly representing where these inspirations are coming from. So there's kind of noise from both sides. But
I think it comes down if you just enjoy the records or not, if that's something that you appreciate Drake for. I mean, for me, it's a case by case instance. Like you guys were just talking about Meet Your Padre. Obviously, like that's an interpolation that I really don't like, and I actually found comedic. So that's something that I'm not. That's it. Like, we have one of our most legendary reaction moments on the Patreon just with like that one song. So I think it's really a case by case study, but with this album in particular, I think it was attacked well. And there's certain pockets of those records, like a Controller or like a One Dance, where he's kind of shifting the tone, and the way that he's kind of attacking, let's say, his cadence, right? You get more of like a traditional Drake on certain verses, but then once he starts attacking it, like, let's say the hook, he'll switch the tone of it, then he'll start using the accent, or he'll start using like a bit more of that sound and that sort of mic presence. So
yeah,
I could appreciate that as well.
I wanted to ask you about that, Anthony, because I remember that was one of your takes that like you weren't too big on One Dance. Has that changed over time, or are the feelings kind of the same as they were?
Not particularly. I am glad that we're having this conversation though, because I feel like I feel like this kind of element of Drake's career and this conversation generally has like really been fucking toxified in a lot of ways. First off, to sort of like, not to come across as if like I'm singularly trying to give Drake a hard time for specifically this, because other artists do this too. He's not even, the thing is like, while I do have criticisms of Drake doing this, I do feel like he disproportionately gets a little more criticism for it than other artists do when they try to do the same shit. Maybe that has to do with the degree to which he does it, or it has to do with the fact that he's as popular as he is. But, Kanye or Ye just had that Spanish song on Bully that was trash. That was fucking horrible, was terrible. And I didn't see nearly as much conversation around that, or like, people saying Ye is a colonizer and so on and so forth, which, words like that I feel like are getting thrown around more and more. Even by white commentators, which I find to be kind of like ridiculous, frankly, since, the beef with Kendrick Lamar. It sort of feels like since Kendrick put those words to those songs, and I enjoy those songs, the effect of that, unfortunately, has sort of been like, everybody who pays attention to these music styles and has these conversations is like, okay, I've basically been given the green light to like say and echo all of this now, which like, okay, pause. Because like, for sure, you're not in a battle with the guy, you know what I mean? It's like there's definitely a line between like saying things about Drake and saying things about his music that are negative in sort of like a critical way, in the way that somebody who's reviewing his music in a fashion where you're trying to communicate to an audience like what works for you about it and what doesn't. And there's ways that you can criticize his music that are like really personal. Maybe that would be fine if you were in a rap battle with the guy, but like you're not, So it's like, if and not to say that you can't criticize these elements of his music, you absolutely can. And, I kind of want to like make it clear that like when I find these tracks underwhelming and I find the adoption of certain like accents or elements to be a little kind of corny or uninteresting, I'm kind of coming at this from the standpoint of somebody who absolutely loves dub reggae, loves artists who have also had like Western appeal that have adopted dance hall styles like Santigold, like MIA. These for me are kind of like touchstone moments when it comes to kind of like serving these styles and these sounds to, geographically speaking, like the same audiences that Drake appeals to, but also doing it in a way to where those artists have also sort of like gotten love from people who come from, those genres and sort of like those traditions in music. And obviously, Drake has been given flowers, his flowers from some people who operate in those genres too. Others, like Ant just said, have had their criticisms in terms of like, it doesn't really feel true to form for me. It doesn't feel like he's actually like tributing the scene. And I will definitely acknowledge, like, he has been consistent with it. If Drake wasn't doing this so often, I don't think we would see, the memes that we have where he's like, with the notebook and he's like, me think me gonna take me life or whatever, and it's like we're just like writing as Drake with the notebook and the fake patois or whatever. So look, bringing a fake patois or bringing someone on to do a fake patois on a rap song, Drake's not even the first guy to do that. Jay-Z's done it. A lot of like major influential artists have done it. So again, it's not even like he's singularly guilty of that. Personally, do I like it? No, not really. But he does like, catch a little bit more flack for it than everybody else who is also sort of like engaged in a similar thing.
Yeah, and I think that's just also a byproduct about how people see Drake as an artist, right? And I think it started at the beginning of his career, especially when people figured out that like he was an actor and like, he would come in and like he would attack a certain sound, but maybe he wasn't cut from a certain cloth, let's say, in people's eyes, especially from the hip hop community, right? Like hip hop fans really gravitate towards obviously authentic artists, and people really hold their stories close to their heart. So I feel like when they start analyzing the record, they look as Drake in the same line, like in the same light as like a Nas, for example,
as
or
a
like
purist,
as a purist, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think people see Drake as a purist, but that's never kind of been a part of his formula. So like, if you've bought into his sound and his mission as an artist, you have to understand that yes, he's an extraordinary rapper, but at the same time, he's someone that's always loved to borrow from other sounds and bring them into his own album experiences. And I think that there's purists in the genre that don't appreciate that. I mean, everyone has their own opinion on his catalog and what he's released, but I think that to say that it's all bad and that, he sucks at this and he sucks at going into this type of sound, that's not the truth. There's so many different moments, not only on Views, but within his entire career where he's borrowed from a sound or he's collaborated with an artist, then he fits like a glove and he does it super well. And, it ends up becoming an explosive record or it's a fan favorite for his community. So I think, especially in this instance with the dancehall sort of sound that was being attacked on Views and how it received criticism, not only from community members or fans that were going into this album, I think that it was just like, it was such a left turn for him, like people maybe weren't even expecting it, or the purists that did buy into something like If You're Reading This, It's Too Late, they wanted more songs like a No Tellin' or like a Know Yourself, and they just didn't get that. So I think that's where the criticism stemmed from. But to say that the quality was not up to par for Drake's standards, I don't think that's the case. And it's just whether you buy into the sound or not at that point,
Really quickly, before I move on to another thing that I wanted to ask you guys, do you feel like in terms of how this record is aged, is this a top 3, top 4, top 5 album for Drake?
Top 4 for sure.
I think this is top 5 for Drake for sure. I think You Have Nothing was the same in the conversation. You Have Take Care. If You're Reading This, It's Too Late. So Far Gone in Views, I would say, is probably where my top 5 is at. But
yeah,
where would you have it in terms of the Drake ranking? And also,
wait, what does Ant think?
No, me and Lou have similar views on the catalog. So I Have Nothing was the same at 1, Take Care at 2, If You're Reading This at 3, and then I personally have Views at 4. I think that entire run from 2011 to 2016, in my opinion, is one of the greatest that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, listen, I'm only 25. So at the same time, like there's only a certain amount of runs that I was able to witness. I can acknowledge that there's better, but being a Canadian and understanding like that type of run, those are the four that are solidified. But Anthony, give us a top five, man. What do you got?
Hold on, I don't have a top five right now, but I know it would land somewhere in the middle. But it's funny. I forget how young you guys are. With that, but it speaks to how you deliver yourselves. But with that being said, I don't know if I could speak to this as much as maybe you guys can, especially like being ground zero in Canada. But this record, we've talked about how it's aged in Drake's discography, and how, you know, it kind of reflects a lot of sounds and ideas that he still sort of like brings into his music now. But do you feel like this record has had like a broader long-term influence? I know after, songs like One Dance and Control, you had like everybody and their fucking mother making, you know, a dancehall song on on their record, around that time. But like, you know, fast forwarding to 2026, are there elements of this album now that you still feel like you hear on other people's albums, or have evolved into other sounds that you feel like people are still like doing to this point? Do you still hear the echoes of this record when you hear new material from other artists?
That's a good question. I can't point out specific albums or artists that are still attacking this type of sound, but I think about the format of the album actually, and sort of the business behind it, and the way that, you know, it is a longer track list. It was formatted for streaming.
Just to pause there, if this record has any long-term influence, it's probably in the formatting. Because people are still people are still track listing their albums out this way.
Absolutely. But I also feel like from a sound perspective, hip hop has taken so many different directions. I feel like hip hop as a genre right now, and it's always kind of been like this, but it's sort of been echoed, especially in 2024, 25, 26, like it's fragmented. So you have so many different communities and sounds that are popping and prominent, and so many people are going for so many different types of things. Like it's hard to look at a mainstream artist that has used Views as like a clear example of an inspiration for their album that has now birthed life for them in their own catalog. So to answer your question, I feel like it's a lot more on the formatting side of things.
Yeah, I will say also, like, definitely the formatting, like that's 100%. I also feel like this album maybe pushed other rappers to want to be a bit more like all encompassing when it comes to like their albums and like what they're able to do, in the sense of like, oh, like let me make a Brazilian funk song and also have a song that's dancehall on the album, and also like have the first half of my track list be more R&B leaning and the second half being more rap leaning. Like Drake is obviously not the first rapper to be that versatile, but just to say, I feel like that's kind of one of the trends that I started to see was, okay, I can't just be, you know, rapping 32s over a drumless loop or something. Like I need to do more as a hip hop artist. I feel like that's one of the influences that I started to see.
And you probably saw that also with like the labels and the way that they maybe push their artists to format their albums in a sonic sense, not in the streaming sense, for their artists, right? Because I could guarantee you, man, anyone behind those desks, bro, they were probably saying, well, fuck, we got to replicate this one. We got to replicate this one. We got it going, you know, we got to get you in dancehall. We got to get you in trap music. We got to get you here. And I think like, to our point, speaking about Drake's versatility, there's not a lot of rappers that are able to be as versatile as Drake in the way that he attacks his studio album experiences. And like Lou was saying, you see it now with there's certain albums where like, okay, you know, you have I'll take the Jack Harlow, you know, example right here, you know, with like the Monarch album that dropped this year, you know, like Jack Harlow like branded himself as a Soulquarian, you know, for a couple of months. And would that be a thing, let's say at this point in time, you know? Would that be as like, it definitely didn't get accepted, but I'm just saying, like, you started to see more and more artists, to Lou's point, start to be like, okay, like I could be a lyrical rapper. That Jack Harlow lyrical in the same sentence is kind of crazy, but I could release more rap centric albums at the beginning of my career, but now I can make this full transition maybe into another genre. I could take this album and I could have 4 out of, let's say, the 16 tracks be not even hip hop influence whatsoever, and the fan base might eat it up just because there was a mainstream album like Views that kind of broke that barrier for a lot of different listeners that came in. And also, to Lou's point, like he's not the first one to do it, but Views, I feel like, especially for like maybe our generation, is kind of like that sort of like gateway. You know, kind of like what 808s and Heartbreak was to a lot of different artists back then, and the way that a lot of artists attacked that sound. I think Views is kind of maybe in that certain lane where people started to realize like, hey, I could do a lot more with my albums rather than just spitting 36 bars and going on an Uncle Al beat and then calling it a day, you know, and that's great too. I still love those albums, but I have to give this album credit for doing that. So I think in that sense, maybe it answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, I think if we were to talk about influence in like a direct sense in terms of this artist is copying this sound, this would be much easier to sort of like talk about if we were doing this video in like 2019 or 2020, you know, because like maybe the echoes of like the splash this album made would be a little bit clearer. If the record is still having kind of impact at this point, it's most likely, like we're saying with kind of the formatting and the track listing, it's maybe more abstract and conceptual. I would say also kind of to your point with, you know, labels or sort of like, you know, PR people kind of like pushing for more variety or more different sounds and so on and so forth. I do think this record probably helped usher in maybe a warmth that audiences now kind of like take as a bit more normal toward more international artists and crossovers that, you know, we hear on like mainstream hip hop albums. But like, if the record is having more influence or any influence now, and this is not any shade to it, I think it might actually even be sort of maybe a negative sort of influence. And I don't think Drake is sort of alone in that. When we think of like some of the most influential mainstream and best streaming rap albums of the 2010s that kind of like defined the genre, I mean, we're literally talking about some of the records that you guys have posted on your backgrounds right there. We're talking about Good Kid, Mad City. We're talking about this album. We're talking about Nothing Was the Same. We're talking about like 2014 Forest Hills Drive. And some of the stuff that these albums have in common is, and even, you know, talking about artists like Young Thug, who had like an incredible commercial run during this time period. We're talking about records that are like super melodic. These are records that are narrative. These are records that are conceptual. These are records that are really personal and introspective. And a lot of the rap albums and artists that are like dominating the youth's listening diet right now are in a lot of ways like the antithesis to all of that. They're noisy as fuck with the production. They're really repetitive and stripped back and ultra simplified and often, you know, quite one note as far as like the sounds that they're going for. I do think like the underground has been trying to experiment and broaden out a little bit here and there, like, you know, with Yeat making an attempt to, you know, make a Kanye album on his new record, for example. But, you know, there was kind of like that hot moment from like about 2020, 2021 to 2025, where it sort of seemed like everybody was trying to run away from anything that was even like the least bit commercial and was trying to keep it as underground as possible. Like, you know, especially when something becomes popular, you can never keep it underground forever. But it sort of feels like we're now starting to like kind of come out of that era a little bit and maybe moving into something else. Not to say it's just going to rubber band back into a bunch of albums or artists that sound like Drake and Cole and Kendrick again. But you know, it feels like for a minute, everybody was trying to run away from anything that might even be as nearly as spacey or as introspective as this album might be and go instead for something that's like a little bit more youthful and hype and aggressive and over the top.
And how do you think like views negatively kind of contributed to
because
that?
I think views sort of like negatively contributes to that. Negative is kind of like a basically you know, a loaded word here. Just there's lots of eras in other genres where the new wave take you know, something that you guys are probably very well familiar with is like Nirvana and the grunge explosion of the 90s, which a lot of rock fans take as like being the rubber band reaction that a lot of rock fans had to decades and decades of like hair metal and soft rock and, you know, all these dudes sort of like in leather pants and big haircuts, just like writing sappy love songs with super long, like, you know, guitar solos and shit like that. Then the 90s was defined by all of this like really sad, dour, ultra aggressive, sort of like nihilistic rock music where everybody was angry as fuck and just like, you know, wanted to shake their fists in the air and mosh and so on and so forth. And, you know, in a lot of ways, there's parallels to that within these two eras of rap music. You know, it's like we're seeing that kind of embodied with the sounds and the attitudes that a lot of artists who are borrowing so heavily from Cardi are taking, and then the way their audiences are kind of like engaging with the music live at these shows.
No, I agree with that. And we had a good conversation actually with one of our friends who's a producer in the industry. And we spoke about this exact thing and the shift of rock music in the 90s. My dad's a big rock fan and so is Lou's. And, the old guys, they're always like, well, fuck, like I didn't like that run anymore. And, they kind of like completely flip like what rock music should be to them. And I think like you kind of see something similar now to hip hop fans where you have a certain portion of the fan base that still gravitates with more of like the traditional hip hop that we're used to. For example, like a Jid, like the new Joey records, like Vince is still doing his thing, like Denzel, for example, the Kendrick stuff, the new Fall Off record. Like I think there's that, but the Cardi wave that exploded in 2020 to a whole different level with a whole lot of red birthed this new sort of want and need for a sound that I don't even think you could call like strictly hip hop at this point. Like, yes, there's certain elements of it within like, let's say the mic cadence and certain things that they're rapping about. But at the same time, like, I don't know. It's so hard to call that like
even looking at
hip hop.
Yeah, even looking at the latest Slayer album, right? Like there's so many different pockets of different subgenres and genres. There's his forte into like hyper pop and so many different sounds. So yeah, I think it's definitely going into a place where like from a palette point of view, there's so much more being pulled from, and the performances are lacking, I would say, the usual type of rap flows and cadences we're used to. And obviously the lyrics are not as substantive as we're used to from the 2010s. But
not to like singularly attribute all of this motion to that explosion, but this is something that potentially could have even in some ways culturally happened earlier. Maybe we were even seeing like initial kind of bubblings up of around the SoundCloud era with all of these like emo trap artists or sort of like rap artists that had like a more alternative kind of like, taste or style, like XXXTentacion, for example. But I think a lot of that, Lil Peep too. But I think a lot of that momentum was stopped short due to the fact that some of those sounds and records did start to stagnate really fast. And, the major artists in those lanes all kind of like suffered tragic deaths for the most part, or moved on or evolved into other trending sounds that sort of like came after them.
Oh, absolutely. But going back onto the views conversation,
do we get where it places for you though? Like, you said somewhere in the middle.
I said somewhat in the middle.
I would say like I don't think it's. I would probably say my top Drake records are the ones that I have the most favoritism toward. Are probably I really like the 21 Savage record. I like If You're Reading This Is Too Late, Take Care. I would say Views probably lands somewhere around like Nothing Was the Same for me. Probably not. I would probably put Nothing Was the Same over Views, given that I feel like its songwriting and formatting is tighter. And really for me, like at the end of the day, and again, it's like I think maybe in retrospect I have warmed up to the album a little bit since my initial review, but my main kind of issue with it continues to be is that I don't feel like, and this could just have to do with sort of like my preferences when it comes to music broadly, not anything sort of like that's an impossible hurdle to pass for anybody who's actually enjoying the album, is just kind of the length and what I kind of perceive to be the bloat of it. I feel like there's an amazing album in here, if I'm being charitable, or at least at the very least a great album, if it were to sort of be like pared down a little bit. Either certain tracks cut a bit shorter if they don't have any variation to offer, or, the track list itself pared down a bit. Even tracks like Hype, for example, I feel like aren't the most necessary, and you might, feel like that's blasphemous. But crazy. To me, I feel like what that song brings, I've already heard on, If You're Reading This, and it sort of feels like in a lot of ways the purpose of this record is to be the antithesis to that and bring like a more kind of like calm, introspective, moody feel after such an explosive record. So I do think there is like a lot of fat around the record that could be cut and would make it more engaging for me personally. But the highlights are still great, and I feel like still stand as like some of his best songs ever.
Anthony, you want to do something? Lou and I often do this on the podcast with an album. We usually go through a track list and we go through our keeps and skips. Would you like to do it? We do
sure. We could go through it.
Since we're on replay.
Because I think this is one of those rare Drake albums that is super long, but it doesn't really have them. And
let's do it. I know you don't think there's any skips. So let's do it. Let's go. All right, keep the family close. I would keep it. I think it sets the tone really well for the record. It's an epic start.
Also, new sonic ground that he never covered before. That grandiose beat, bro. The orchestral instrumentation.
Sure, it feels a little weak encoded though. A little weak encoded. Don't even say it doesn't. Don't even say it doesn't sound weird. Don't even say it doesn't.
Anthony. No, anyways,
you guys, wait, pause. You guys cannot say it doesn't. You're Canadian, okay? All right. Yes. Keep it
Which album
Canadian.
in particular? Which album in particular do you think it borrows from?
I would say Jesus Christ. Hold on a second. Let me
something
check
moodier, like a Kissland, maybe. But
not even Kissland specifically.
I can't even think of a beat on Kissland that would sound like this though. Like
hold on.
Such an epic beat.
Yeah,
like,
it's beautiful.
I don't know.
Okay, no, this came out. Yeah, that's what I thought. No, actually, my reference point for this is actually the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. Which, if you remember, had that really sort of over the top, like the strings and sort of like the grandiose instrumentation. It's not even like Kissland. It's more the 50 Shades of Grey, which also did really well commercially, you know? Yeah. And I know it's kind of easy to sort of like forget and look over because it's not in the core catalog. And I do think he might have touched down on that sound again later on a track or two deeper into the catalog, but it was actually the 50 Shades of Grey, and that came out the same year. That was out around the same time.
I guess we'll attribute it to 50 Shades of Grey. I guess so.
I guess so.
All right, next up, 9. We're keeping this, obviously, right?
I feel like 9 is a track that does get a little repetitive, like some of the other ones I'm not crazy about, but it does have some of the most iconic lines on the record. Obviously, flipping the 6 into a 9 is one of the most memorable bars on the album for sure.
Yeah, even just the blend of like rapping on the first half to, you know, the singing section of the second half. I feel like that offers enough of a dynamic factor to keep me engaged. I love this song, bro. Like a nighttime drive listening to 9.
Yeah, this one's a trunk.
Those lush synths on this song. Come on, Anthony.
And the boy won the drums. Yeah, there's no criticism with this one for me. Next up, You With Me. I think we could all agree on this one as well. That's the keep.
Yeah, no, like I said earlier, I would keep this one too. I feel like as far as one of Drake's more kind of free format type of performances and just like kind of throwing out melodic lines, throwing out bars, this is a track that works for me.
Beautiful. So we're 3 for 3.
Drake's personal favorite song of his, Feel No Ways.
This is his personal. What do you mean? This is his personal favorite ever?
Yeah, he named this as one of the favorite songs of his that he's ever made.
Really?
Yeah.
I find that interesting. Okay.
And I think it's for the fan base as well. The fan base loves this song.
That's a fan favorite for sure. It's one of my favorites off the album also.
You know, this track is, as much as I do, like I said earlier, I really sort of like praise the way he frames the relationship that he's singing about on this song. One thing that always sort of like hits me in a weird way on this track is the way he will not just break into melodic lines, because obviously he does that, but like he sort of hits with this like really deep, almost like kind of over the top karaoke kind of register. It's like, feel no ways. And he just like, it just feels so like off-putting for me. I don't know. So, I mean,
yeah, but there's also like a sort of nostalgic factor to the production as well. It was produced by Jordan Ullman, and like you're sort of going back to like old, like 80s aesthetics, for example. And I think that's another thing that he did well with this record, was sort of borrowing from an old sound and bringing it back to the forefront that has more of like a modern twist. So
yeah, those crispy drums.
Like, yes, exactly. Like it's very like beat heavy, for example. But something else that I think it really works for this record is like, I think for a lot of Drake fans, bro, like they just fucking love putting this on in the whip and cruising to it.
He poured his heart into the vocals of this one, bro. Like honestly, this is one of my favorite Drake R&B performances probably ever.
It's really up there, yeah.
So yeah, I kind of stand on the other side.
So we're all unanimous on 4 for 4, right?
Wait, I don't know. Are you keeping this, Anthony?
Are you keeping this?
I would keep it too. I think the writing is too good to throw it out.
Hey, so far, listen, bro, we're almost like
4 for 4.
4 for 4. I want to see where this blows is. Okay, next up.
I'm skipping hype. I don't need it.
It's crazy.
Wow.
It's wasting my time. It's wasting my time. Especially since, again, I heard this on If You're Reading This Is Too Late. And if I want a hype moment, I would rather just skip right to Western Road Flows. Like it's better writing. Like it's a better instrumental. It's better everything. I would just rather skip to Weston.
Oh, bro,
that's so crazy.
I think maybe it's because like we enjoyed this so much when we were 16, and like there's a nostalgic factor to it.
I think it's also a case where like I feel like it's pretty normal, like especially from one album to the next, to like have an artist tap into like a similar sound and aesthetic. We see that all the time, right? Like, is that a reason to not fuck with the song? I don't know.
I guess I guess not only did I just get in on the previous project, but it just feels paler in comparison, I guess is the thing. It's because like I've been saying in this, like, when it comes to a song like Weston, when it comes to a song like Views, that's a really classic Drake format at this point, but I feel like not only is it a classic Drake format, but and I don't know if this is just like, his mentality when he goes into these types of tracks. These continue to be make or break moments on all of his future albums from here. And he typically does really well on all of them. It sort of feels like these are the moments where he really feels like the pressure's on. This is when people expect me to be at my best. This is when I really have to perform. And he always does it.
Okay, so
I was thinking like, even like, I don't know, random example, Igor to Call Me If You Get Lost, right? Sweet, I Thought You Wanted to Dance, borrowing heavily from like the sound and the pitch, the vocals from Igor. It's two different album cycles, two different eras, same sort of sound and style. I can still enjoy it, but it's a fair take in the sense of you find it paler in comparison. I get that.
All right, let's go on to Western Road Flows. That's obviously a keep.
Obviously a keep.
That's
yeah,
a huge
keeping that.
Redemption.
Skip.
I'm keeping that.
It's boring. Boring. I'm skipping it. Yes, it's boring. It's boring.
We're coming after you for that one, bro.
With You is even sleepier. I'm skipping With You.
With You is more debatable. That's where it's like, I can understand why you would skip it. I still like the chemistry between Drake and PND, especially in comparison to some sexy songs. I'll keep referencing that.
It depends on the mood for me.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of like better than the bulk of some sexy songs. So.
Which the bar's not high there, so take that as you will.
Right.
So yeah, I understand that as a skip. I would personally be on the fence with it. Depends the day. I'll keep it though. What about you?
I think this one depends the day, bro. It's another one of those, but I guess for the sake of the game, I'll probably skip this one. I think Faithful's a skip for all of us, low key.
I would say Faithful. Yeah, I'm skipping it. I just really hate the way that it's funny. I'm skipping this one, but I feel like there was potential in this track if Drake just came at it with a different flow. It's not even the tone of the instrumental or the pacing about it as much as he just leaves so much dead air in between every line. And it sort of feels like there's just so many moments that you could be filling on this and you're just not. And I feel like if you were really like dedicated to this instrumental, you could have said more on it. Or if you were really dedicated to this flow in these bars, you could have picked a beat that brought it all closer together and just condensed it.
Yeah.
So it's not without its potential, but it just feels like it was just kind of malformed.
And even to your point, like, I feel like my biggest problem with the record too is like, it's a bit of a mess, like organization wise, like you're getting so many different things, whether it's from Division or like sort of the lackluster Drake flows that for me on such a cohesive album, at least I think so, like, especially with like a lot of these records and the consistency and the track consistency, when it comes to my rotation, it's like, nah, bro, I got other places to be on this track before I visit.
And also, like, as cool as it was to get that posthumous Pimp C appearance, it just doesn't fit on the record. You know what I mean? Like, that would have fit better maybe on like the following track as an opener, like a Still Here, for example.
Yeah, but speaking about Still Here, are we keeping this or not?
I'm keeping Still Here, of course.
I'm gonna keep Still Here for sure.
I feel like I'm fine with Still Here, but listen, I will say like my positivity toward the track, I feel like is heavily painted by the fact that it's like a much better listen than the previous three songs for me. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like if it was right up against Western Road Flows, would I have as strong feelings about it? Maybe not, but it does, I do appreciate it as a pick me up on the album. Like, okay, it feels like we're coming back to life a little bit here.
But out of the album sequencing conversation, like as a record itself, like would you ever bump this if you were not revisiting Views?
Yeah, if this comes on
like just by itself, probably not. Like just by itself, probably not.
All right, next up, Controller. I'm keeping that absolutely.
For sure. Gotta love the island vibes.
I'm not keeping Controller.
Honestly, does not surprise me, Anthony Fantano. It does not. Okay, next up, we have One Dance. I think I know your answer on this one.
I'll say positively, charitably yes on One Dance because I do think the chorus is catchy. Even if I do think like it's not the best portrayal of like dancehall or anything like that, like it has withstood the test of time as one of Drake's stronger singles. So why not?
Got to throw something on the grill when you're bumping this one. That's this type of record for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, gotta get a Corona going and get some ribeye steaks on the grill for
Fuck
one
yeah.
dance. Next up, Grammys. I'm gonna get this.
I
It's
think
kind
I
of an
think it,
extension of What a Time to Be Alive. Do you feel like it would have fit
Right,
better on that
exactly.
track list?
yeah, almost, or rather, it's almost kind of giving me the same sort of dynamic with hype in terms of like, this feels like something I've heard Drake do before and, very immediately before. And I kind of preferred what he just did with it. It's like, this does feel like a continuation of the classic chemistry that Drake and Future have. And I think their voices play well together because they have two different styles that, it just naturally brings whatever they do a good amount of versatility. But I don't think it's anywhere near close, like their best song together.
No, it's not their best record that they have, especially from that era of creating together. But I love the beat switch on this. I like the Future feature. I think it's one of the stronger ones off the track list. And it's interesting because this is one of the records I feel like gets a bit of criticism from the fan base. Like there are certain pockets of the fan base that don't enjoy this. I've seen some Twitter discourse on this record, and it kind of surprises me because, bro, this sounds like a cut off of What a Time to Be Alive. And if you like that record, you're going to like this song automatically. So I'm going to keep this. But let's go on to the next one. We have Child's Play, the Cheesecake song. We have the Cheesecake record in play here. Fantano, are you keeping this? Yes
As
or
soon
no?
as I hear that cheesecake line, I skip. I don't want to hear anything about a fight going down a Cheesecake Factory. I'm just so not into that.
I'm gonna keep
Child's Play. I like it.
Pop Style. Are you keeping Pop Style? This was actually a single for the album, and it was
Yeah.
kind of supposed to carry the streams.
It originally featured the Kanye verse and like that one line from Jay-Z
Yeah.
because he didn't want to give a full verse because he was kind of siding with Meek Mill a bit. Kind of a weird situation. I like this one. I like the darkness and the production. I think that the flows are cool. Writing could have been better maybe, but still an enjoyable song. I'm keeping it.
Yeah,
right.
I would keep it. It does bring like a moodiness to the record. It's like, for the sake of the versatility of the album, I think it should stay.
Yeah.
All right, and this is arguably some of the best track runs on this entire track list.
This next too good. We didn't talk about it all. The whole
We
the whole
did.
We haven't
conversation.
spoken about Too Good, but I fucking love this record.
Well, what do you guys feel like in terms of like the record aging with the Rihanna feature and also like the Rihanna right next to me like bar? That's
Honestly,
like thrown in there.
For sure, I think like it spoke to the time, and it
Right.
spoke to like what type of situation that Drake was in. And for me, like it's the balance and the back and forth, especially once you start going into the chorus and the way that they're able to share it. Like the chemistry is undeniable with it. The production from Manish in 1985, like there's just a beautiful vibe to this record that I really enjoy, and it's super catchy.
And again, sonically it kind of stays within this dance hall wave that they were both fully immersed to, right? Because they did work and they followed it up with Too Good. Then again, I think the chemistry is off the charts. I think it's super fucking catchy. It's one of those songs that you hear in the radio and you're happy to fucking hear in the radio. At least I am.
For sure, absolutely. And even speaking onto something like Work, I prefer this much more than a Work. I know Work was probably a bigger song at the time, but I feel like the songwriting is stronger on this. The chemistry between both of them is stronger as well. And I think it's aged better too as a song when you look at like this album experience or like even their collaborations. For me, this is up there like what a Take Care self-title to be honest with you guys. So I'm keeping this.
Okay, so then we got the interlude.
Summer's Over interlude. Oh, bro, this is awesome.
Incredible.
I love this song. Do you like it?
Yeah, it's fine. I think it adds to the flow of the record.
Yeah, this is an automatic keep for me, especially in the context of a full listen. I think it's a sin to actually skip this over when you're going through the album. Fire and Desire, though, this is an underrated song on this album, bro.
Really? What makes it? Because this is another underwhelming song for me. What makes it underrated for you?
Okay, when I look at, let's say, certain R&B cuts on here, like, for example, A Feel No Ways, that gets a lot more celebrated. Now a lot more people are talking about a redemption, but Fire and Desire is one of those R&B cuts, for me at least, where in Drake's catalog, bro, you have such a polished vocal performance throughout the entirety of it. Bro, the sample flipping back is beautiful. I like the writing on it. I think it's an emotional performance from Drake, and it's one of those Views R&B cuts, bro, that just land home for me as a whole in comparison to other songs that you got off of the track list. So at least that's my explanation for it. So
yeah, I mean it's classic Drake, right? He's rapping over an old Brandy sample. He's kind of in the fuckboy persona, trying to steal a guy's girl away from him. Like the fucking performance is super catchy. I love all the easygoing melodies. Yeah, I think it's
And then views we're obviously going to keep.
That's an automatic keep. Yeah, and we haven't gone into depth of Hotline Bling. How did you feel about this record at the time? Like, did you enjoy it? I can't remember.
I loved it. I thought it was one of his best singles ever, and I still think it. Even though again, it doesn't feel. Views to me feel spiritually like the real closer of the album. Like Hotline Bling doesn't really fit in with the record and feels slapped on there for stream's sake, which is fine. It's a huge song. I feel like it needs to land somewhere. I feel like it would be idiotic for Drake not to put it on any album properly. But it just kind of feels like an extra, to me. I love it, but it doesn't like contribute to the album experience to me in the same way that like Views does or Weston does in sort of like a narrative way.
No, I absolutely agree. One of my favorite things actually about Hotline Bling is that bridge at the end, where like it completely shifts in tone. Like, I really like that part of the record. So, Anthony, you have a load of skips on here, bro. You low-key do have a load of skips on here.
Sorry,
no, it's okay, man. I'm not losing sleep on it.
I will say I do feel like even though there were a bunch of skips on there, it's probably less skips than there would have been after I first heard it. Like,
yeah, so speaking of of how you first heard it compared to now, like you said that you've warmed up to a little bit.
Yeah.
Would you keep? I don't know if it was a 4 or 5 you gave this record. Would you stay with that score?
I'd probably bump it up at least a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably bump it up at least a little bit.
Potential redux coming on the way. Are you going to do a redux for it?
I don't know if my opinion has changed that much to warrant a whole redux. It would probably have to go from like a 4 to a 7 or an 8.
Hey, that's the bump up though. That's a serious.
No, he's not.
Well, no, I'm saying it would have to be that in order for me to do a whole redux about it.
Okay, so you're thinking about maybe more around like a 6, where it's kind of passable for you.
Yeah, I flipped the 4 into a 6 now.
But you know what? Like, I don't think this album's a 9 or it's a 10. Like for us, like on our scale. I'm sure you're familiar with our scale. Like we go bad, mid, good, great, amazing, and perfect. Like for me, like actually this album's grown on me. When I was listening to Drake with Lou in high school, like I didn't fuck with Drake all that much. And then, listening to this record and getting, sort of a feel for it, it really grew within my rotation and I grew a huge appreciation for it over time. So for me, like I would still like rate this between great or amazing for me, at least on our scale.
Yeah, on our scale it'd be that, and like in terms of a number scale, I'd probably say like 8.5 for me.
Like around there, yeah.
I think it's a special record that you could just so easily get immersed into, bro. Like the mood building, the change of the seasons, all the nods to Toronto. I think that like he knew what he was doing in the sense of, again, creating an immersive experience for people that are kind of within that world. So, yeah, man.
Well, thank you guys very much for talking to me about this album. I think you forgot this was my show. You're doing your show. This is actually my show. I'm inviting you on to this isn't an episode of NFR, just in case you forgot.
We hijacked the channel.
Fantano, Nick in the background sending you an invoice after this one.
Yeah, apparently.
Man, listen, thank you for having us on, and it's always a pleasure doing content with you. I feel like every time we get in a conversation about music, it's always great to hear your perspective. You've been reviewing albums for such a long time, and you come from a different era than us, and we attack our content in different ways. So it's always interesting to get into conversation with you, especially on an album like Views that's so special for us. So thank you for taking the time today, bro. We really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you guys doing the same.